All right, so we have we're rendering several dynamic pieces of content as different widgets. Notice that below we still have the hard-coded content. Let's we can remove all that, right? Let's remove all the static content at the bottom of our HTML that it was only there for us as a guide, right? So let's remove it from down here. Okay. So what we'd like to be able to do now is that instead of hosting all these widgets in one single page, right? We would like to see if we could break this up, right, into smaller components, into smaller reusable components. These little widgets might not be the only place where we want to render these things, right? Perhaps we want to share them across several pages, right? Now, to do that, Angular provides a mechanism to be able to move some of this content into reusable HTML snippets that can then be loaded dynamically, which we've already been doing this, right? But we've been doing it with the top level page. We haven't been talking about the page being broken up into smaller pieces, right? So let's focus on that, right? So for instance, let's move this footer into a separate file, right? Maybe the footer. Notice that it might be that you're using the same exact footer all throughout, right? So instead of writing these 10, 20 lines over and over and over, what we'd like to be able to do is reuse that across your different parts of the website. Okay, so to do that, we'll see. Notice that here's the footer. Looks like the coloring is wrong. Let's change that real quick. Using a bad practice. Not that you would ever do this in the assignment or in production. So typically you would namespace different things. For instance, if you have different sections, so you would add here you would have here something that would namespace things. You would namespace them and say that this is the footer for, or the entire page. You would namespace the entire page and say that this is class. What is this? The widget list. So WD widget list, right? So that means that even though you might be including the same content, right, in your classes, right, in your rules, you would make it more specific rules that would be specific to a particular page, right? So a footer, or header or footer under .w widget list would render blue, but under .w website list would render red. Okay, so you would have different rules for each one of them. Okay, probably with dedicated style sheets for each one of the sections. If the style sheet gets really, really big, it's a good idea to break it up into into separate files. Right. At the end, they're all going to be concatenated and minimized all together. But for development, right, it makes it so much easier to just break it up. Right. Same thing for all our JavaScript. Right. All our JavaScript, we're writing dozens and dozens of JavaScript. At the end, they're all going to be concatenated and minified together, right? Yes?
Would it be possible to use ng-class to do that instead of hard-coding?
So ng-class, you would use ng-class if you want to programmatically decide what class you want to apply. Here, we're using it only as a namespace. Excuse me. Right?
But
so
could you use ng-class to look at the URL and determine if it's a...
That's awesome. Yep. That's very, very good, right? So what he's saying is that you would do, excuse me, ng-class, and in here you could use maybe not the local controller, maybe a top-level main controller, and that main controller can look at this URL or the structure of the URL and decide, oh, I'm in the widget, I'll use this class, right? Or I'm in the website and I'm going to use this other class. Yeah, that's awesome. Yep. We're going to use that a little later when we are way at the home page. Here at the home page, right, notice that all the links are showing, right? Login, register, profile, right? And depending on on the status, whether you logged in or not logged in, right? We're going to apply different styles, different content. We're going to turn on and off certain things on and off. Yep, and we'll use that. Great idea. All right, so let's where were we? What was I doing? All right, thank you. Yes, right. So we're going to put some of the common content. We're going to move it out from here, right? And we can put it in a place where we can reuse it, right? So let's do that. This footer, for instance, what we could do is that instead of living here, right, we could move it into a common directory. Maybe put it under views. Say that this is common. Right, all the things are common, and so we could put maybe the footer here. There might be more than one footer, right? But all the footers might be under here. So we'll call this is the global footer. So footer.view.client.html, right? And copy the content here, right? Now from within the list view, we can now instead of hard coding in here, we can now programmatically or logically load that content, right? We can say inject into this content using ng include, and we can tell it where that content is, right? Which in this case is inside of views, inside of common, and footer dot view dot client dot html, right? And so if I refresh, notice that the footer is not there. What? Why isn't that? Did I misspell it? Fused. Oh no. Okay. No. All right. So, all right. I'm going to put here a single quote and single quote. Try it again. There it is. So the footer's there. So what happens here is that ngView is actually more powerful than we know just yet. ngView can look at this, right, and interpret this as a variable, right, that can be dynamically evaluated. So that this URL can be a dynamic URL that you can calculate on the fly, right? Maybe passing it to a function, or and depending on that function, you then come back with what the URL you want it to be, right? In this case, we're not doing that, right? We are literally telling it exactly where it is. That's why we're putting it in quotes, right? This evaluates to a literal path where to fetch it. Or this could be a function, right? This could have been model dot, get URL or something, right? And it could go fetch the URL and return it here as a string, right? That makes it very, very powerful, right? That you can have content that can adapt, right, and include different pieces of content as you navigate, right? So for now, just let's leave it like that. Okay, there we go. So it loads the footer. We can do the same thing for the header, right? Especially if it's something that we are reusing across several pages. But everybody understand ng include? Yes. Well, we could do something similar for all of these, right? Heading and image and HTML and YouTube. Now, some of these widgets are trivial, right? There's just one-liners. And so you might ask, well, why even put it outside, right? And reuse, right? Why can't you just have it here? Well, first of all, we would make it so that we can reuse it in other places, right? As a reusable component. But also, notice that the different types of widgets is likely to grow, right, as the product gets more sophisticated, and at some of these could be as sophisticated that they might want to have their own controllers, their own little controllers as well, to handle events and things like that. Yes.
If you have headers and footers that are specific to, let's say, just widgets,
Mm-hmm.
would it make more sense to have a common folder within the widgets folder?
Yes, right. Yeah. So if you have different footers and different headers, you can certainly split it up and put it under there. Sure. And use the technique of being able to calculate the header that you need based on some logic, right? Yep. Or use the location, right, to know where you are, and then load the appropriate header as well. So what I was trying to say here is that some of these widgets might become fairly complex. One of these widgets might be maybe like a data table a widget, right? Where maybe some of the attributes here you can configure it with maybe a SQL statement, right? That can then go out to the server. The server might do a query, and then it comes back with a JSON object that then this widget might iterate over that and generate a dynamic table, right? So it could become a fairly complex widget, right? That we can drag in there, right? And then you might have controllers that for that particular data table widget that would allow you maybe to sort, right? The data content or remove rows or drag rows around. So I mean, some of these widgets could get fairly complex. Most of these right now are fairly trivial, but let's move them into their own HTML just to give you a sense of how you would do this, how you go about doing that. Okay. All right. Also, they're simple enough that we can practice it. All right. So let's start off with first the heading widget. Right. So I'm going to grab this content. Plus, I'll need to grab this piece here, right? Because this piece goes along with this, right? It's the logic that drives the selection of the templates, okay? So to do that, I'm going to split these two into two divs as opposed to just one div. I'll just have one div inside of another div. There we go. And then the inner div is the one who's going to host the ng switch. Okay, so now I can just grab this. I can grab all this and put it in a separate file. Okay, so let's cut this and put it in its own little file. We'll call it HTML. We'll call it what is it? Widget. Oops. Widget heading. .view.client.html, right? And we'll paste in here that content. And am I recording? Yes. Now that we pasted in there, we can go back to the list. Go back to the list, and the place where it was occupying, we can now include, right, that content back in here. Correct? Right? And we'll say that this is div. ng include, and then paste here the location, and the location is all the way from views, widget, templates. What else? Widget dash heading dot view dot client dot html. I think. Well, let's try that. Let's render. And indeed, we have the widgets, right? If we inspect them, right, we'll see that they were loaded from an ng include. There it is. That's the ng include that included this. And notice that it's right now in the content, this div is empty, right? There's nothing in it. But at runtime, notice that indeed it went in, right? It grabbed the ng switch, it brought it into the DOM. Right, and recompile this and gave the context of the widget. It knows that the outside context, there's a variable widget, right, that still has meaning inside. Right, it still has meaning inside the heading widget here. See this widget variable, right? That widget variable has no meaning in this template, right? It only has meaning in the context of somebody providing a value for that widget. See that? Right? That's good and bad, right? Because it makes this particular component, right, dependent on the component outside of it, right? Typically, when we're working with dependencies between reusable pieces, right? Instead of having this global variable, I'm assuming there is a variable that it's named this way. Usually that's a bad practice. Ideally, we would have a very well-defined API, right, where I pass you the data, right, through some well-curated API, and which would somehow be then mapped into a local variable size, which in this context would be used for rendering, right? To do that, we need to know how to do directives. Okay, we're not there yet. We'll do directives a little later. right? Which will allow us to extend the same idea of include, but take it to the next level, right? So right now, let's just use ng include. All right, so we did that. Let's do a couple more. Let's see, we did the widget. Let's do the image. Again, let's grab this. Let's grab this, right? And create the create a new template here, and this will be widget image.view.client.html. And we'll paste that content in there. Again, this assumes that there's a variable outside a higher scope that is providing value for widget. Again, dependencies like this I would rather not have. But let's do this for now. Okay, so in here would be div ng include, and it would be, let me copy this. Right, and this would be image here, right? Image. Let's render it. Okay, it still works. It's not broken. Let's do it for HTML as well. Well, actually, no. Let's leave the HTML. Let's move the YouTube. Let's grab this and put it in its YouTube HTML. So this would be widget dash YouTube dot view.client.html, and paste that YouTube in there, and then load it from here. So this will be ng. Let's grab it from here. Copy, paste, and this would be widget YouTube. This is YouTube. Let's render, and YouTube loads. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? Yes. Not yet, but when we get to directives, we would, yes. Right? Directives will extend on this same idea, right? Where you say this is a template and this is a controller for it. Yes. I believe that's what we ask you to do. Yes. And then you would include one editor or another editor depending on the type of the widget. Right? So you have an energy switch and you reload the right one. Yes?
So the edit, you should rename those to be different so that like editors should be in the same file.
I believe that's what I asked you. Let me see.
Or if it's like their name the same now, I guess.
They are? They shouldn't.
So it'd be like widget image.
Let me see. Oh, I do? Oh. Okay, so there's two ways of doing this, right? And I guess because you might already be working on this, I'm not going to change it. So you can host everything inside one, right? Inside one HTML, this one like here, right? And you don't include anything. And depending on the ng switch, depending on the type, you hide certain things, you show certain things, right? Or you have all 3 or 4 versions of the form, right? And you depending on the type of the widget, right, you display certain form elements but don't show others, right? So that's one way. The preferred way would be to split it up into includes, right? That would be the preferred way, right? But I thought that's what I had asked. I guess not. I thought I'd give you ng include examples. Okay, ng include. I'm sorry? Okay, so ng include. All right, so these are, oh, there it is. All right, so I implicitly ask you to do this. Right? Here they are, right? So I implicitly say have a separate editor for each one, right? And depending on the type, right, include the edit or the image edit or the YouTube edit, right? But since perhaps you might consider this to be a little ambiguous, I will accept it both ways. If you want to implement it this way, or if you want to keep it all in one single file, I'll accept both ways. Yes?
Could we alternately just move those old code snippets into a subdirectory
Yep. Sure. Yep. Okay. No, not yet. Only those three: image, YouTube, and heading. Okay. We'll do HTML in the next. I think it's the next assignment, right? We'll start talking about directives, and we'll use a WYSIWYG editor that will allow us to enter HTML. Okay. All right. Notice that this is the implementation that we are doing right now. Right. This is the snippet of code that loads the various types of widgets. Yes, this is the implementation. But there is an even better implementation than this. Okay, which let me show you. Remember I showed you earlier what happens if you remove these quotes. It becomes a variable, right? It becomes a variable, and so like good software engineers, we're always looking for patterns here, right? If we find ourselves things that look very similar to one another, we always look for patterns and see, okay, well, what's the same between all of these, and what's different? Well, they all seem to use divs. They all seem to use this ng switch when. They all seem to be using this ng include. The only thing that seems to be changing from one to the other is that this is heading, and this is heading, and this is image, and this is image, right? And this is YouTube, and this is YouTube, right? So, could we somehow, right, generalize this, right, and perhaps use the widget type, which is this, as the name of the file, right? And we can calculate the name of the file, right? We can call a function that says, hey, this is a widget type. Give me the URL to that file, right? So we could, in theory, collapse all this into one line, right? One single include, and perhaps one or two JavaScript a piece of code, right? So let's just play around with that idea. Let's just play around with that idea. So we're going to leave what we have so far. Right before there. Actually, no. Let's break it. Here we have heading. And here, right, we're going to try and collapse all these 1, 2, 3, 4 implementations into a single one, right? So ng switch. Let's see, ng switch. Do we even need the switch? Do we even need the switch? We probably don't even need the switch. We can just say div ng include, right? And what do we want to include? We're going to go out to the model and say, hey, model, get widget URL for type. And we're going to pass it the type, which is widget.widget type. And notice that's what we're going to include. See that? Right? And so let's implement this. So on the controller, where is the controller? Widget list controller. Let's implement this. So model.get widget URL for type. Okay. Here we can implement it, function, and this is a type. And the type, we're going to use the type to come back with a URL that looks fairly similar to this. Yes? Right, we're going to come back and say we're going to return that URL, that string, right? But this is a type right here. This is a type, and this is type. Yes? Now the only difference is that this type is all caps, right? But the file names are all lowercase, right? We could either change the file names so that they match, or just convert this into lowercase, to lowercase. Okay? That makes sense? Right? So if we refresh, we might have broken the whole thing. Notice that we have duplicates See that? Which is exactly what we expect, right? This one is using our new technique. This is using the old technique, right? This is the new technique, the old technique, the new technique, the old technique. Make sense? Right? So we could just collapse all these four, all this entire ng switch, right? Could just be that one single line of HTML plus that one single line of JavaScript. Yes? Right? This technique fixes one of the big problems in Angular 1, right? That you can only have one ng view. Up to this point, we've been injecting everything into ng view, right? And there's only one of those. You can't dynamically have nested ng views, so that you can't break up your application into smaller little, self-contained little applications, right? Which is one of the big challenges when you have very, very complex, large applications where you have, lots of navigation on the left, navigation on the top, then sub menus and submenus, and it's fairly complex as you start navigating, and you'd like to be able to break it up into smaller little apps, right? When you only have one ng view, it's very, very hard. This ng include, right, mechanism allows you to get over that challenge, right? In Angular 2, multiple views and nested views are supported, but there's also another library other than ng-route. We've been using just ng-route, which is the out-of-the-box routing mechanism that Angular gives us, right? That allows us to navigate and the routes and whatnot, right? There's another competing, well, not competing, routing library. It's called a UI router. If you want to read up on it, UI router. This UI router is the basis for Angular 2's routing mechanism, right? So the Angular team, grab all of the same ideas from here, and this allows you to have nested views, right? Allow you to break up your application into smaller little snippets, right? Smaller apps that are self-contained, which is a very nice way of dealing with complexity, large applications. It also allows you to think instead of just templates and controllers. Allows you to think in states, as the application moving through several states, right? And as it moves through several states, certain certain views and certain controllers are activated, right, and take over their particular portion of the page. Okay, so this is definitely a good thing to take a look at. We'll go over UI router maybe next week or the next or the following. Right, it's a very good thing to know. All right. Thank you.